I ab- absolutely cherish and deeply, deeply value my time with my family, with my loved ones. And um, I think that's probably the most important thing out of all of it. But there are 24 hours in each day. And there are moments where um, I feel sort of I don't know how to describe it, other than saying it's a drive or a calling, or it's something where I have to go and write this thought down, or I have to go and record this melody that won't leave me alone. I've more recently, like especially in the past couple of years, being kind of sit, stewing in it, so to speak.
Yeah.
I've sort of lovingly been referring to it as kind of a mental illness that has benefits. So it's a little bit like there are I'm sure that other people who are in creative fields could probably attest to this, but images and melodies and thoughts and stuff come flooding into your head, and if you don't give them kind of space and voice, they sort of haunt you, and they won't really
Yeah.
leave you alone until you um, like turn them into like life forms that you set free into the world. So under the wrong circumstances, that could be seen as like, this voice won't leave me alone. I got to go do something terrible. But in this case, it's like the voice is telling me to write a song or paint a picture or go and find other people who approach creativity like you and help them develop their, aesthetic voice. And in this case, this is what became the Moonlight Arts Collective, which is something that we're launching this month. Um, it's a creative platform that's going to be releasing fine art print releases, hand signed and numbered fine art print releases from um, multi-dimensional creatives, like people who we might know from film or music or sports or something. And then when they get home from their like the job that we know them for, they moonlight as painters or photographers. And there's a ton of them out there. It's really wild how many people that we know from certain creative fields go home and paint. It's kind of amazing. And so what it's basically been showing me is that like I'm not alone in my kookiness.
Well, it's quite a talent because I saw a video yesterday of you working. I think it's your home studio, and you've got a real eye for it. And that's the thing about sort of photography as well. A lot of people just do, as you said, normal jobs, and some people just have an eye for a great photo or a great opportunity or a great landscape. But your
Hmm.
paintings are amazing, and of course, you're using that for your cover art for the single, which is really cool.
Thank you so much. Thanks for saying so. Painting has been something that I've been lovingly obsessed with as well. Like it was same with music. I feel like if I didn't give it space and give it voice, it would kind of drive me nuts. And so I've just learned how to make more and more space for these types of creative impulses. And what's amazing though is that once you start like down this road of giving space to these creative insights or creative impulses, whatever they are, you end up desiring uh, less non-constructive things in your life. You start desiring to make more time for them, as opposed to making time to watch trashy TV or filling up your space with chattering media that is doing you no good whatsoever, and it's just maybe scaring you or outraging you. Like I said, there are 24 hours in a day, and what's interesting and to me, which is sort of sad and telling about where we are at our spot in modernity, is that we are content to give up some of those precious hours every day to things that aren't necessarily informing us better. They're not making our lives better. We're just sort of like we've accepted some of these things as normal. And I am a little bit more stubborn than that. I want my idea of normal to be like, I'm going to turn off the news and I'm going to go paint, or I'm
It
going to
would,
turn off
yeah.
and I'm going to be with my loved one. and have that kind of communication. So it definitely changes your headspace.
Well, it was an intense time, the start of COVID, because you had all the protests, you had sort of insurrection, and you had COVID lockdowns, and it would have been a time where you could easily go home and just, just overthink about everything. And because, we're all getting older, I can see why you talk about the 24 hours, because as you get
Mm,
older, you realize how important time is and how little time you have left. And,
true. Yeah.
that's something that when you're young, you don't really think about. You're like, it's fine.
Right. Right. Yeah, we're blessed with that kind of illusion of all the time in the world when we're young. And God bless. That's how it should probably be. We shouldn't be thinking about those kinds of things when we're young and dumb. But as you get older, you can't help but start to notice things, and you can't help starting to notice the passing of time and your own, uh, humanness and your own mortality starts to become more and more and more real. And that doesn't need to be a depressing realization either. It can be something that is revelatory and almost enlightening in a way. It's like, wow, I'm not going to waste this time. I want to go do good shit to the best of my ability, at least. And I want to go seek out other people who not only are of a similar mindset, but also seek out people who I can healthily disagree with. And I can get into some kind of robust debate and start to kind of broaden my perspective in so many ways. There's just so many ways that I feel like we can do better than we have. And this period of time, these last 2 years of this pandemic have been truly strange. As I probably don't need to tell you or your listeners, it's been a very,
For all
very
of us.
odd period of time. But in a lot of ways, it's been revelatory as well. We've learned so much about ourselves, both good and bad, and everything in between. And I hope that as we kind of like start to, crawl our way out of this, and as the dust settles, we emerge better for it. You know what I mean?
Are you finding some of your songs over the last 30 years, have they changed meaning after the last 2 years? Like everyone sort of, you know, reads into a song, depending on what's going on in their life and everything. But there must be some songs where you actually go, you know what, I can put it out right now. It'll make complete sense.
Mm. Yeah, I've noticed that the sort of topics of the things that I've been writing about most of my life. It's funny because I say this often, but there is so much of the time, I would argue most of the time, when I'm actually like writing lyrics and stuff, like I don't know what I'm writing about. I just sort of write, and a majority of it over the years have come out expressing a kind of a longing or a heartbreak or a hope towards a sort of a rekindling of some type of an intimacy or love. And I have pretty good ideas at where that stuff came from, having had my heart shattered into a million pieces a handful of times at a young age. So
Yeah.
but I suppose I was filtering through that stuff. But as I've come into my mid 40s now, the things, and this with this new record, Echoes and Cocoons, it's a lot more about less about I and more about we. I suppose there's moments where there is an I amongst that we, but it always kind of is circling back into a more of a kind of collective stance. Like, what does this mean for us as opposed to me? So I suppose from a sort of evolution of consciousness perspective, it makes sense that a younger mind is more self-centered, and as we age up, it becomes more about like what is happening around me. Where do I fit into the bigger picture? That kind of
Yeah,
thing. Does that make sense?
that makes complete sense. And tell me, what was the starter of all this? I did hear that it might have been the circumstances of a girl moving in and rediscovering music and discovering new music, and then
Mm.
sitting down and going, oh, hang on, there's something here.
Yeah, my girlfriend and I, we became much closer over the last couple of years.
Yeah, yeah.
It was like a forced closeness, but in so many ways, I'm really grateful for the opportunity. If it weren't for the circumstances which forced us together, I would say it would be a completely wonderful thing. But however it had to happen, it has happened, and we're much closer than we were. But yeah, we have this thing where I've been practicing meditation for most of my life, but more seriously for like the past 10 years. And there are other kind of practices that have kind of come into that practice. One of them is tea. I do like I was taught a little over 10 years ago a tea ceremony. It's a tradition called Cha Dao, which means way of tea. And it's this wonderfully simple, very humble practice where you basically just sit down with hot water, tea leaves, and a bowl and a kettle, and you sit in silence and you just drink tea. It's this amazing thing. It doesn't need to be anything beyond that. And that's one of the things I love about it. But um, my girlfriend started joining me for tea, and we would sit there, and we have a really hard time sitting in silence together, though we do sometimes, but it's difficult because we have a lot to say to each other.
Yeah.
So we end up just kind of like, it's a moment every day where we sit down in the afternoon and our devices get turned off for the most part, unless we're talking about music. And my girlfriend is sort of the consummate audiophile. Like, she is obsessed with music, probably more than me. It's amazing to me that she herself doesn't make music, because she's like as precious as you could possibly imagine about her music. And so I've discovered a lot of great music through her, which is kind of amazing. But yeah, we were just having tea, conversating about music. We were showing each other things that we liked. And there were a handful of things that she showed me where I was like, damn it, this is like frustratingly good. Like, I wish I had made this. You know, it's like, if every musician can attest to that moment when you hear something, you're like, fuck.
Yeah.
I love this, and I hate the people that made it because I didn't make it. But anyway, there was a name that kept sort of being associated with a few of those frustrating moments where I wasn't involved in it, and it was John Congleton. So he's a producer and songwriter. And so I was like feeling super courageous one day, and I just reached out to him on Instagram. And
How good is
fast
that?
forward like 6 months later, and we had written and recorded a record together. We recorded it remotely. So he recorded his bits at his home between his house and his studio. And then I recorded my bits at my house. And then we would like send them back and forth, email, FaceTime, that whole thing, telephone call. And we made a really cool record out of it. This was all during like extreme lockdown circumstances. So we didn't actually meet face to face until the thing was like done, which is
That is insane.
wild. It was a different
Yeah.
experience for sure.
That is maximum trust. But you know, and listening to it, you can. I know he had a bit of work with Sigur Rós, and I could hear it was almost like he crossed Incubus with Sigur Rós a little bit, you know, and a Better Universe particularly, and a bit of futuristic James Bond kind of gear, and I was like, I can hear that, you know, and
Those are
it,
lovely compliments, by the way, for me, because Sigur Rós is incredible, and obviously John worked with them in the past. But then the Bond vibes, especially like in the some of the musical orchestrations and some of the arrangements, were coming through for me. But I didn't want to like say anything about it. But it's
yeah,
been a
yeah.
consistent feedback. People are like, I'm catching some Bond vibes on this. Yeah. I have this weird. I have a couple of musical dreams left in me, and I won't give up on. And one of them is to record a Bond theme, to write a Bond theme that's used in the beginning credits of the film. Like, that to me is like I could quit after that.
That is the musician's benchmark. Even if you get considered for one, you know, you're in the mix. Often you're left with an incredible song, even if you didn't quite make the cut. But that would be
Advocated by the Radiohead track that the last Bond film didn't use, but the track is incredible. It doesn't sound to me like a Bond song, but it's an amazing song, and I'm glad that we got it, regardless of where it ended up. You know?
Yeah, yeah, and even I think there was a Muse song in there, which was meant to be a Bond track, and it didn't become that, but it was just a great song,
Right.
and so writing the album, do you think in lockdown and complete lockdown as it was, did that make it harder to write, or was it actually a little bit easy because you're in a cocoon pretty much, you know?
I actually think that it was the perfect scenario to write an album in relatively short order.
Mm.
Yeah, there was nothing to do at the moment that we started writing the record here in California. The lockdown was so extreme that you were only allowed to go to the supermarket or like the gas station or the emergency room. Like you,
Wow.
I'm really blessed. I live in a place called it's in the Santa Monica Mountains recreational area. It's this big swath of like very rural, beautiful part of Los Angeles that when you're like in the Santa Monica Mountains, it feels like you're as far away from LA as you can imagine, but it's still technically LA. But we have a lot of like sneaky trails where we can go hiking and, climb rocks and, talk to trees and all that good stuff. But like state parks were closed. You couldn't go to the beach. And there were some amazing days where you would just like drive down there and it was like perfect surf and one dude out and a bunch of cops waiting for him on the beach to arrest him, take his gear, and fine him like $1,000. It was weird. So I just stayed home and wrote music. Yeah. So in answer to your question, I think that it was probably the perfect environment. There was this sort of existential angst hanging over the whole situation, and then you can't go anywhere. What are you going to do? It's like write music. What else can I do? So,
and you had a girlfriend who was quite supportive, obviously, and was, drip feeding you new artists you never heard before. But were there any that she played that you were like, well, this is actually really good. Why haven't I heard this before?
Yeah, I mean, too many to mention. But a few that stood out that led me towards John Congleton's production work and his engineering skills and stuff like that was like Angel Olsen, All Mirrors. It's a beautiful record.
Yeah.
Gosh,
That was the one I was going to try and get out of you because I was leading you down
it's
that
a
path.
gorgeous record. If people haven't heard it, it's really, really, it's wonderful. She's a very vital voice in music right now, in my opinion. But like I said, there are so many, I wouldn't even know where to begin. So I'll just leave you with that one.
Now, onto the album, Echoes and Cocoons, which, I mean, you can sort of obviously read into even the name of the album and go, oh, well, it's a bit of a COVID lockdown sort of name almost in the circumstance. But were they all songs you wrote on the spot, or did you have a few that could have been Incubus songs maybe, and they made it in? Because I know that everyone's got a scrapbook and you have thought starters.
Yeah. There was, I was writing a little bit before I reached out to John, and I just because I write, you know what I mean? Like I feel like people that make music, they just sort of write regardless of whether they know, whether they know where it's going to end up or not. So I can't say whether some of the ones that I had been writing previously would have ended up as Incubus songs, because it's a little bit more of we do sort of, it's like albums by committee. There's 5 of us, and then so most of the time, like the instrumentation stuff, like a vast majority of the time, instrumentation ideas come from Michael and Ben, and then I write lyrics and melodies to those ideas, and then they get arranged into songs by the 5 of us. So it's a different process, but it's really fun and challenging. When I do solo work, it's a little bit more like I get to be like the benevolent dictator, so to speak,
Yeah, of course.
And working with John was interesting because he was sending me musical ideas, so like instrumentations, and I was responding to and writing lyrics and melodies to them, and then we would arrange them based on that. But then I'd send him ideas that I had been working on, and it was really fun because there was less sort of the committee effect and a little bit more of like oh, I see what you're doing here. What if I just put this bass line on here? What if I just drop this weird little beat right here, and then voila, it's a song. And so the next single that's coming out the same day that the record comes out on March 11th is called More Better. And that's a perfect example of one that I was sort of messing around with. There's a guitar and a vocal and a loose arrangement. And then John kind of helped just like bring it into focus and dropped a cool beat in there. And
Yeah.
all of a sudden it was like 10 times better than what I'd handed in, but it wasn't terribly different. It was just like more better.
And then there's a cover on the album as well. Was it
There are
from?
two covers
There are
actually.
two covers, right? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. One of them is one that I'd recorded here at home early days of lockdown that John ended up mixing. And it's an Angel Olsen cover. It's a song called Fly on Your Wall. And it's a very simple arrangement. I just played it on the piano and sang it and put some weird like noises on it. And John did a fantastic job of mixing it. And then there's a track that I recorded with my friends who played in the Sons of the Sea band when I did shows around my last solo project, Sons of the
Oh
Sea,
yeah.
back in, God, this would have been 2014 or
Mm,
something.
mm.
So it's Greg Rogov, who is playing drums, and he plays with Devendra Banhart and his band. It's Zach Ray, who plays keys and guitar in Death Cab for Cutie. It's Joel Shearer, who has actually played with Sigur Rós a lot and Yonzi quite a lot
Oh yeah.
on
Yeah.
other projects. Joel is all over the place. He's an amazing musician and artist. He was playing guitar, and then a good friend of ours, Milo de Cruz, playing bass, who also is a multi-dimensional artist. He's an amazing photographer, but a really good bass player. And we did a cover of this track called "The End of the World" by a band from the 70s, early 70s, called Aphrodite's Child. And we recorded it actually before COVID was on anybody. It wasn't a thing. It was like we were in the normal world, so to speak, when we recorded it. But I was just kind of sitting on it. I was sitting on like an unmixed version of it, and I loved it. I knew it needed a place to live. And then we got into COVID, and I started writing this record with John. And all of a sudden, I was like, "Oh wow, we have a track called The End of the World." Put it at the end of the record.
What are the end of the record?
Yeah, he mixed it. He did an incredible job mixing it, and it's actually one of my favorite songs on the record. It's a little too appropriate for given circumstances.
Yeah, yeah. This is the weird thing that happens though. Songs are in the back burner, and then you just go, "Oh, hang on, this is actually perfect for right now." And then obviously, people read into songs as well and go, "Oh, it's totally about COVID." It's But what a way to
Right.
end the album. It's incredible.
Yeah.
And so with the arts collective, and you got these amazing creatives you've brought together. Is there anyone else in the last 2 years of lockdowns and semi lockdowns you've connected with that you didn't think you would, and that kind of changed your life in a way in the last couple of years, apart from your girlfriend? But
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. It was perhaps the most antisocial time in my whole life.
mm, yeah,
That probably goes without saying. Um, but yeah, I wouldn't even know how to answer the question accurately. Like, I mean, the relationship I forged with John Congleton around this record was really cool, and I really love to continue to make music with him because we had a really sort of effortless flow. Um, I, I suppose it would be fair to mention that I had just as many fallings out with not people that I knew and loved, but certain ideas and certain ways of seeing the world and being in the world. I had relationships kind of like sort of ended or have started to kind of taper off.
mm,
And a lot of that has been my relationship to American mass media. I've been, I always took it with, kind of a healthy grain of salt, I suppose, because, any kind of mass media type of a scenario has what you would call perverse incentive. It's like if it's driven by a financial incentive, it's 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 bound to infect their process in some way. But as we sort of like rolled into this COVID era, um, I was watching this sort of like steady drip of fear mongering and outrage, and I just started to get a little bit like kind of suspicious, not
Mm.
quite, you know, not quite cynical yet, but I was like suspicious. I'm like, how are they reporting with any level of certainty when we don't know? Like we don't know what's really happening. We're not gonna know. And the way that like actual scientists work, they don't work in certainties. They work in their best case thesis, and then someone
Mm.
comes and tries to prove it wrong, and then they do this back and forth, and it takes time. So to wrap up the question, I think there were just as many moving towards people and new relationships in wonderfully loving and constructive ways, but then there was just as many like moving away from older relationships
Oh
that
yeah,
no longer served me, you
I
know.
mean, there were a lot of people I knew who, you know, unfortunately, you're on Facebook and you see things pop up and you go, oh my, oh
Exactly.
my,
Facebook is the proving ground.
my friend's an anti-vaxxer. What? So embarrassing. Look, but before we go, because so Echoes and Cocoons, your third album, and I love that there's still a romance when it comes to an album. Even though there's pressures from outside to release singles and EPs, and they're great too. You believe that there's still the future in releasing an album.
I will hold on to that idea, that fantasy, as long as possible. I still just adore an album. Like when you find an album, like a whole album experience, like 10, 12, 13 songs that an artist or a team of artists has gone to great lengths to sort of curate for you. Uh, and you go through that experience with them in the headphones or in your car on a long drive. To me, that's still where it's at. I know I'm in the minority when it comes to most people just absorb like half of a song they like, and then they move on to the next song when it starts to bore them. But I don't necessarily think that's the most constructive way of
Mm.
absorbing art. So I like to try and sit with something, and if I don't like it, whatever. But if I love it, I like to try and see where the artist wants to take us.
Yeah, yeah. Well, look, a better universe as a song is just a masterpiece, and I
Beautiful.
look forward to hearing the whole album as a whole, and as you you know curated it, and it's going to be great. And look, thanks so much for your time. We can't wait to see you in Australia. I think you're long overdue, and I know you've got
No,
friends you want to catch up with, and you want to go and have a surf, and everything's getting back to normal over here. So I think the timing's right.
I can't wait to come back. Yeah. Thank you so much.